Okay, we are recording. We're live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this Dev Shop Marketing Briefing with my guest expert, Liston Witherill. Couple things just about what we're doing here. If you came into this by being on my list, you saw me just like beat you over the head about asking questions. Liston has got some great information about a topic that I think is super relevant. The topic of teaching in real life as a method for generating leads. I think it's great because what it can do for people's trust is unique compared to other methods of lead generation. So what I'm hoping is that, what I know for sure is Liston's going to do a great presentation. And then what I'm hoping is you will, as he's talking, sort of mentally imagine that a month from now, you're going to have to actually do this for the first time. And then you'll ask questions as if that's the reality, as if you're going to challenge yourself to actually do this a month from now. So I really want you to use this time as sort of, group consulting light, just to pick Liston's brain and learn from what he's learned about actually doing this kind of lead generation. So I don't know, how long have we known each other, Liston? 2 years?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I'd say maybe 2.5 years. You're one of my very first internet marketing pals, so I'm always happy to help you in any way I can.
I just immediately liked Liston when we met. I think we bonded perhaps at first over some hip hop artists that we both really think are great. And ever since then, I've really felt like Liston's approach to business is super thoughtful, super just kind of careful and intentional. And I've always respected that. He's also great at what he does. And that's why I wanted to have him here, is because he's got some real experience using teaching as a form of lead generation. I do too, but I've done it all online. And the one time I tried it IRL, it didn't work so well. I kind of, it was sort of a flop, probably for planning reasons than anything else. So I think with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Liston. Liston, you got the floor for 30 minutes, more if you need it, but give us what you got for 30 minutes on this topic. And then folks who are here watching, there's a Q&A button at the bottom. So if you want to queue up questions using that would be fantastic. But if you can only think of stuff kind of on the fly, that's fine too. We'll just have basically up to an hour after this for questions where you can just ask your questions. I can bring you into the video feed so that you can like ask Liston live and chat back and forth. So anyway, Liston, it's all yours.
Yeah, if you're open to it, Philip, too, I would encourage anybody, if you have a question and it kind of fits into my presentation flow, I'll tackle it right then, and maybe we can go a little bit over 30 minutes. Because my real focus is to get all of you guys the information that you need. So Cool. If you have questions, let them fly. If I don't get to them right away, just be patient and hang in there with us, okay?
Awesome.
Cool. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right. Can we all see that?
Yep, I see a slide deck. Beautiful, beautiful slide deck.
You see a slide deck. I know. I went with the courier typeface, which is new for me. But I thought it was appropriate with hopefully some fellow nerds on this. And I can tell you. So my name's Liston. Some of you on this presentation, I think, may have been exposed to me through an expert roundtable I did with Brennan recently. But if you don't know me, I just want to talk a little bit about myself in a second. Before I dig into that, I want to go over our agenda. So as Philip said, the focus of this is about teaching in real life. And so I think there's a lot of questions that surround that. I'm going to kind of tackle two of the biggest ones, which are finding your topic and common pitfalls that you may face teaching in real life. And I'm also going to give you some examples of my experience in numbers. I taught a live workshop in December at the Growth Marketing Conference in San Francisco. I live in Portland, and so there were some costs associated with being there. And I'm going to go over what it cost and what I got out of it in more than one way. So Before I get to that, about me really quickly, I'm a pro marketer. I have a company called Good Funnel, and now I'm starting to teach people a little bit more about how I do business and why I make certain choices in my business and what it actually yields for me. I've been featured on over 50 podcasts and live events, so I make it a habit of publicizing myself a lot. I've actually recently hired someone to help me get on more podcasts and do a really blown out outreach strategy. So you'll probably be hearing a lot more from me in the very near future if you haven't recently. My company is Good Funnel, and what we do is a ton of research for clients who need help improving their conversions. And so what we actually do for them beyond that is writing their messaging, their copy, and improving their conversion rates through conversion rate optimization. My background is that I am a scientist. I have a Master of Science in Environmental Science, but I really, really dig on sales and marketing, and understanding how and why people make decisions is really my big driver. So first, you may be wondering why I do live in-person teaching events. So what we mean by teaching events, let me cover that really quickly. I think there are ways where you can go and do a regular recurring class where people are signing up as if you have curriculum, similar to this, where you would have a deck, you have a promise, people can come learn it, you're up in front of the class for 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is at conferences. Conferences often have very focused workshops, so that's another way to do it. And of course, you can be a speaker at a conference, and I think there are some tremendous advantages to that as well. But that's kind of the universe of what we're talking about here in terms of in real life teaching. Is there something I'm missing, Philip?
I don't think, I mean, aside from the more conventional training stuff, which we're really not talking about, this is more teaching as lead gen. So I think that definitely covers it.
Okay, right. Yeah, we're not talking about corporate training or, a company hiring you to come out and do a workshop or one-on-one coaching. That doesn't count. This is really a way to generate leads. And so I want to be clear that it's not just about lead generation directly in that moment. So I'm going to get to pitfalls in a little bit, but one point I want to make that Philip kind of touched on earlier is if you do one live event and it doesn't pan out, that doesn't mean live events won't work for you. That just may mean, like Philip said, maybe you didn't plan properly, maybe you didn't fully understand what the audience was going to be, maybe you underestimated the size, maybe you didn't have a next step for them. Whatever the case, I think there's all of these other advantages beyond lead gen to doing in real life events. So one is networking, being able to connect with the event organizers, other speakers. You have much more credibility to connect with speakers there. And of course, your audience. One is credibility. As you do these live events, you get to throw up on your website, hey, this is the type of thing I've done, and these are the places I've been featured, which is extremely valuable in terms of social proof. Another thing is much faster relationships, and as Philip said, a much higher trust factor. Because you're there in person and you're in front of a group of people, whether it's true or not, the way we interpret information and what's important and who we should pay attention to is partially just who has been designated to be the speaker at an event, right? So that conveys a ton of trust for you. And also, if you're like me and you sit behind a computer all day, it allows you to get out of your cave. So that's also a very good thing, because there is a whole world of people out there that we need to go see, occasionally at least. So you may be wondering about your topic. How do you find your topic? And the first thing I would suggest you really need to do is know your audience. And so I have something that I call the perfect persona, which is something I can share with you all later after this. And what we look at is who is the type of person who would be perfect. If I could do a thought experiment and dream up my perfect client, what would that person look like? Where would they go? What do they care about? What influences them? And so I only want to speak in places where that person will be in attendance, okay? So that's your first bit of planning. And I know it may sound extremely obvious, but I think it's also important to think about, right? Am I going to be in front of the right people? Because the right message and the right offer is pretty meaningless unless you're giving it to the right people. So keep that in mind. You're going to have to know your audience and make sure that your audience will be there in attendance. The second thing is, once you know your audience, understand what they want, right? So there's this kind of Venn diagram, right? On the one hand, they want something. On the other hand, you want to teach something, and it should connect directly to your services or products or whatever else you do. And that overlap in the middle is really what you should be talking about. And so you're going to need to do a little bit of investigation. Now, the truth is that doesn't mean going out and interviewing 5, 10, 50, 100 people. That could be as simple as just looking at what are some of the other events in this universe, what's been covered, where are the holes, what's a unique angle I can take where it's already been proven that people go out and view topics like this. The third one, and I alluded to this already, is you have to align your topic with your services, right? So if you're watching this, you probably sell consulting or coaching services, or you do production of some sort, or maybe even you have a product or two. What I would say is it's going to be a waste of time if you can't align your topic with the things that you sell. And so don't fall into this trap of just doing whatever the organizers ask once you get some interest. And there's going to be a really strong temptation to do that. I'll come back to that in a minute. Another way that you can find your topic is by prospecting, right? So you can look for conferences and meetups and ask your clients, what are the things that you go to? Where do you like to spend your time? And understanding what those events are about and getting to know those event organizers will start to clue you in as to how you can add value to that audience. So that goes to the last bullet. See what past and future speakers cover. So these are all ways that you can find your topic. There's no like one perfect answer, but I would say you have to know your audience and you have to understand what they want before you can even approach it. So I kind of look at it as two ways to find your topic. One is to push, decide on a topic and look for places where you can talk about it. So it's a little bit different than what I've said already, but that's definitely a viable way to do it. The second thing is to be more event and audience focused, which is going to be really your primary way of finding your topic. So find events where you want to speak and craft something that works for them. So I'll give you a little tidbit on this before I move any farther. When I'm doing outreach to be on podcasts, typically what I'll say, and I'll give credit to Kai Davis for some of this formula that I use, is I'll say, hey, I'm Liston, here's what I do professionally. Here are 3 things I can talk about and I know your audience really cares about. I send that same pitch to everybody, right? Occasionally, I'd say about a third of the time, people will say, great, topic number 2, I'm all for it. Another third of the time, they tell me to get lost, which is fine. And then the last third of the time, they say, that sounds really interesting, but can you customize it for my audience? And my response to that is always, absolutely, delivering value to your audience is just my primary goal, right? And so when I talk to them, I ask them, I get out of them, what is it that they're looking for? How can I deliver value to their audience? And usually it's just a reframing of one of those 3 topics that I want to talk about, which all, heading back to this last slide, which all align with my services, okay? So that's a really important thing. So as an exercise, one thing that you can do is only speak about 3 topics or less. I would really resist the temptation to just do anything that people are looking for. I'm sorry, I'm seeing a chat in here. Can you comment? Okay, hey Kai, or Kay, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Please do use I'll answer your question, but please do use the Q&A panel from now on if you have any questions. It's at the bottom of the screen. So only speak about these 3 topics. And the reason to do that is because you'll know that you're always on message. You're always tying everything back to your services. And also you build up a brand over time, right? Imagine if this year you had the very fortunate success to get, say, 20 events under your belt. Well, if you talk about 20 different things at all 20 events, there's not going to be any brand recognition or momentum that you're building as a result of that. Whereas if you're limiting what you say to just a few things, you start to build a lot more momentum, brand recognition. People, when they refer you and they go to your website, they'll see, cohesion. They'll see a common story, a narrative. And so it's really important from both a, your work point of view, how long will it take for you to prepare for these and make them successful? But it's also really important from a marketing point of view. So I can't really emphasize that enough. So common pitfalls. This is probably a foregone conclusion at this point. Teaching topics that don't relate to your service. I've done this many times. Everybody is happy to have me. For example, this wasn't an in real life event, but I wrote a blog post about inside sales. I know a lot about the topic. It just doesn't relate to any of my services. I get hundreds and hundreds of shares for this company. It's Datanize, a prospecting service. But what good does that do me? Not having a call to action is another big, big problem. So at the culmination of your presentation, you should always have a way for people to get a hold of you and or get more information related to your talk. The more you do this, the more you're going to see that you don't have to create anything new, right? So if you have your 3 topics that you've picked, you should have a presentation, a call to action, and a follow-up for each. That system will ensure that you give yourself more chances to generate leads as a result of your in real life teaching. The next thing is kind of squishy or soft skills, but don't be shy about what you know. Don't go up there and make apologies or say, I hope I can give you what you want. Don't hedge on any claims you're making. Be definitive. People want to see confidence. They're attracted to confidence. And just by you getting the gig. Can everybody still hear me? I'm getting notifications that my microphone has changed.
It blipped for a second, but you're back to your good microphone.
Oh, goodness. Okay, good. Yeah, so don't apologize. You know a lot about what you do. You have a lot of valuable information to offer people. And so it's really good to just stand up there and be confident. So don't, it may be hard your first time, your second time, your third time, especially if you're an inexperienced public speaker. But I can tell you for sure it gets easier the more you do it. It's just a matter of practice. The last thing that I see a lot of people making a mistake on is not involving their audience. And there are lots of ways to do that. One way we've done it here today is to invite you to ask questions, right? So what I would always do, especially in a room full of people, is you'll see people tuning out, right? And it's not because you suck or you're boring. Well, it may be, but probably not, right? It's probably because they have a million other things on their mind. They thought about not coming at the last minute, but then they came anyways, but they thought they'd, catch up on their email while they're sitting there, whatever it is. I would always call that person out and say, hey, do you have a question? It looks like I lost you, right? And I'm doing that for several reasons. One is to essentially let other people know I'm paying attention, but also to reaffirm my goal today in being here is to give you guys something. And so if I'm doing something wrong, if you have a question that I haven't answered, if you're confused, I'm going to stop in my tracks and make sure that you get what you need out of this. And so definitely involve the audience, because once you lose the audience as a whole, it's not going to work out. And the more engaged the audience is, if you do reviews of your talks, which I like to do, you'll find that it'll be more highly reviewed. People will be more likely to recommend you as a speaker the more you're able to involve the audience. So one way is to call on people. I always warn them in the beginning, this is an interactive session. I'm planning on taking questions. I'm planning on calling people and soliciting your opinion. And I'll also do quick little exercises. And the value of that is to get a few people talking to each other. It breaks up the talk, and it makes them feel a little bit more integrated into what I'm doing there. So in terms of being really confident, I don't want you to be this person chuckling nervously. You know, it's definitely a natural tendency we all have. But at the same time, I don't want you to be this guy, right? You have to find a balance between nervousness and being overly confident and try to walk that fine line in the middle, which you will have to learn for your own style, whatever works for you. So let's make it real. I've done a lot of talking about all of these things that you could pay attention to. Now I want to give you a real recent example. Like I said, this happened in December, December 7th, 2016. I did a panel at the Growth Marketing Conference with Heather Morgan and Sujan Patel. It was mostly me and Heather did most of the talking. So I got up there and I talked for an hour and 15 minutes on copywriting and conversion for growth-minded businesses. So what did I get? So at the event, there were 37 students in this closed workshop. So it wasn't part of the main conference. It was a breakout session. People paid, I think, $600 each to sit just in my workshop, which bodes well for their attention, right? Especially if they paid out of their pocket. Most of them don't. But if they paid out of their pocket, they're going to pay attention for a $600 workshop. It cost me, and I get this asked all the time, what's your cost? $900 in travel expenses. Those are hard expenses. So that was the flight, that was per diem, which for me is pretty cheap because I'm not a fancy person. I rented an Airbnb. I took Ubers from downtown San Jose to the conference. And actually, it would have been a lot cheaper had I only done an overnight. I was planning to go to the entire conference, but I had to sign paperwork for my house. And so I got on a plane and flew back. So out of that, one thing I want to be clear about is you have your yield, right? So on the one hand, I had 3 sales qualified leads come out of that, which is pretty strong. Out of 37, that's a pretty good ratio. I would say that's a really good performance. I'd say on average, you'd be looking at like 1, maybe 2 leads for every, say, 30 people. So 3 by sales qualified leads. Let me step back. That means they have the budget. I've identified a problem. They trust me and want to work with me. And now we just need to figure out exactly what the project will look like and if they can swallow the price, right? I did get a closed sale as a result of it. Someone I did not know going into this. And that was a $3,700 contract. So that's a 3 times return on investment. So that's really good. I also, though, had some other benefits. And this is what I want to emphasize to you, is that speaking in real life is not just strictly leads. Yes, it has to come down to some business case. You're going to have to say at the end of the day, this makes sense for me to do this over and over again, or even once in a while. But there are lots of other benefits. So I have now a personal connection with the other speakers who've offered to help me get in major media outlets like Forbes Entrepreneur, right? I have a stronger connection to the conference organizers who I've done lots and lots of events with in the past. I sat next to someone who's head of growth for Ramit Sethi, who said he'll definitely be on my podcast. So that's cool. I also have one referral partner who will pay me a percentage of anything I refer them in terms of business. And I got the offer to speak at, now I've been confirmed to speak at 2 more events for this growth marketing conference. And hopefully I'll land a 3rd one by the end of this year. So all of that came out of this one thing. Now, granted, this is like the sixth or seventh time I've done something there, but the audience is new, right? The podcast guest, the referral partner, the personal connection with other speakers, the sales qualified leads, all of that stuff is new as a result of doing this event. I also wanted to mention, and I don't have these numbers in the deck, but throughout the course of my relationship with Vasil, is the name of the guy who runs this networking / conference company. Throughout the life of our relationship together, I've gotten somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 of business as a result of doing these workshops with him. I get lots and lots of leads on my list. I get all kinds of other benefits beyond just, the dollars, but it has translated into some good success for me. Another thing that I've done is I've taught at General Assembly. General Assembly is a very fast growing company that creates curriculum for business, essentially. They'll teach people how to code. They'll teach them HTML and front-end development. They'll teach them analytics. They'll teach them business skills like what I'm doing here. And so I went to them and I suggested, why don't you let me do a regular recurring workshop on copy? Through that process, I was able to get over 200 students. I got paid for it, and they did all of the marketing. All I had to do was create the curriculum once and show up. I got about $8,000 in client revenue over 2 clients. And I got one thing that has been really exciting for me this year is a pro bono project with kiva.org, which is a really cool nonprofit that resulted in a case study whereby we were able to get them 27% increase in lending, which is something that we can talk about for our business and potentially now approach other nonprofits with. So again, all of these benefits are like much beyond lead generation and strictly trying to translate it into revenue. That stuff is important, but I also want you to think about the networking possibilities because they really are big if you can think ahead a little bit. So that concludes my presentation, and I would now like to open it up for questions. And it looks like we do have a question. Oh, we have more rolling in.
Here they come.
Here they come. Okay, the flood begins.
So I can be your question curator. How does that work?
Yeah, that works well. Why don't we start with the question from Kay Cole in the chat?
Great. Okay. So Kay says, can you comment on the best ways to find and approach conferences? Kay has speaking experience, but not at conferences.
Yeah. So the best way that I've found is just to connect directly with the organizers and do a little bit of homework. So what I mean by that is figure out, who are they? What is their background? What are the kind of trends? So if they have some history of putting on these conferences, say at least 2 years, you can look back and see what are other talks that have been given and how can you fit in what you want to talk about into their program while delivering value to their audience. That's the way I would approach it. And then just basically pitch them and say, hey, I've been following your conference for a while, and I'm looking to speak because for these reasons, I think I can add value to your audience. How does that sound to you? Go ahead, Philip.
Okay, I totally sneakily added you to the video stream. So if you want to ask any follow-up questions or chat about that, now's your chance. So I had a question about, let's see, your first approach. I mean, is it email? Do you just kind of like in your first email say, here's what I want to do, here's the talk I want to do? Do you respond to like a request for submissions to the conference? How does that look at a slightly more detailed level?
Okay, so at a more detailed level, my first step would be to figure out, do I have a connection to this person?
Okay.
Right? So I'm looking for organizers of the conference who are in a position to decide on curriculum. And so what I'll look for is a direct personal connection. So this is yet another argument to keep your LinkedIn up to date. And so I'll head over to LinkedIn and I'll see who do I know over there who's connected? And I will, if I know someone who's connected to the conference organizer, I'll ask for an introduction from them. That introduction is going to be the absolute most important way for you to get your foot in the door. Another way to reach out to them is to just, prospect for their email and cold email them. I think what you'll find is you're going to have to look at it as a tiered system, right? So I'm in, a lot of my clients are in tech. So if I try to get onto the stage at the Business of Software, which is one of the most prominent conferences in the space, they're not going to listen to me. They don't take cold applications except for a lightning talk, which we can get into that in a second, because there are some opportunities to go in cold. But at the most prominent places, they have their pick of speakers, right? So chances are they're not going to take you if you're totally unknown. So you need to look at, what is a place where you would be as qualified or more qualified than a lot of people who they take, and kind of, push your way in. And by push your way in, what I mean is find the person's email address, email them, and don't stop after one. And this goes to any type of outreach you do, whether it's to sales prospects or podcasting or live events or whatever. You should not stop for, say, 6 to 7 emails. And if you have a process for it, it makes it a lot easier. But that's what I would do. And you can also pick up the phone. I mean, look, the one nice thing about the phone is if someone picks up, you have their attention, right? Whereas with an email, you may have only some percentage of their attention, which is not the greatest thing ever.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to bump you out here, assuming you have no other questions there. Okay. So I got a question from Vincent. Hold on just a second here, just clicking all the things. Vincent says, how do you move from speaking at a conference to a sale? Do you pitch from the stage? Is it more like a follow-up type thing?
Okay.
That's a great question.
That is a great question. So I'll give you, hey, Vincent, I can see you now, just so you know. So I'll give you 2 examples. One is I went to the Infusionsoft conference, and this guy who runs a consulting company called Sixth Division, he pays to go there, right? Because he pays, his expectation is I'm going to sell from stage. It's definitely packaged as a workshop, but at the end of it, he gives you the whole, it's kind of like an infomercial pitch, right? Where it's like, and now if you want me to do this for you, here's what it's going to cost you. But wait, it's 50% off just for the first 20 customers. But wait, I'll also throw in this. I thought it was kind of ugly. First of all, let me say, the guy knows what he's doing. People were running to the back of the room to give $5,000, $6,000, $8,000 to this guy. And so it worked. Not my style, right? That's not how I would do it, especially in a setting like the one I showed you, where it was all about, should I stop sharing my screen, by the way, Philip?
I think so. We'd love to see you
okay.
Even bigger.
Okay. Well, speak for yourself, huh? Okay. So in a setting where I'm giving a workshop, to me, that's totally inappropriate. That's not the way I would approach it. And so, I would instead give people some sort of download. Here's the obvious one. Do you want the slides? Most everybody's going to say yes. I have that pitch for everybody on this call today, right? If you want the slides, here's what you have to do. And usually what I'll do in those situations is I make everybody fill out a review form, and I ask them to grade me. And I ask questions like, what is the most useful thing you learned today? What is the least useful thing you learned today? How likely are you to recommend this? And then at the bottom, I'll even say, do you or someone you know need help with anything I covered today? And they can write it in. And often what will happen though is people who are interested will come up to you afterwards. And so one thing I would say always is at the end say, hey, by the way, I know it's kind of weird. Sometimes your questions are very personal or very targeted at yourself. So if you have a specific question for me that you didn't ask in the Q&A section, I'll be hanging out for the next 20 or 30 minutes. And a lot of people will come up to you. The one sale that I closed from this growth marketing conference that I shared with you guys came as a result of that. Someone coming up to me afterwards, I said, do you need help? He said, yes. And so for me, the conversation ends there. I just said, great, what's the best way for me to follow up with you? And now I'm putting them into my sales process. Does that answer your question, Vincent?
Yeah, no, that's great. So it sounds like it's really just about opening the door to having those deeper conversations with those clients. Or
exactly.
Clients.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thanks, Liston.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Great. Okay. So got a question from Aisha, and actually I just remembered Vincent, I'm going to throw you out and make you a mirror viewer again. I got a question via email from someone who couldn't join before, and I think it goes well with Aisha's question. So her question is, do you have a teaching structure? So like, do you have a framework, or do you have like a certain way you move through some content? And that's related to this other question. Can't remember the guy's name, but his question was basically, how long do you have to prep to do a good job teaching? Do you have something that you could share there? And then Aisha, I'm going to add you to as a panelist here if you want.
Okay.
You don't get any choice about it.
Yeah. So hi Aisha. I don't have a hard and fast structure that I follow every single time. Mm-hmm. What I try to do is understand what is the problem that people have when they sign up for this. What sorts of things are they looking to achieve by fixing it? And then what can I teach them in order to fix it, right? Mm-hmm. There will always be a very strong pull to deliver too much information, especially in the beginning, because you're going to go, oh man, I need to make sure that everybody gets so much out of this that they're going to tell everybody, and it's going to be the greatest thing, and it's going to solve all of their problems. Well, we don't necessarily want to solve all of their problems, right? We want to solve one or two targeted problems, because the reality is, even, I've done a 3-hour class, which, by the way, I would not recommend. It's a long time to stand up there and talk. But when I do a 3-hour class, even then, I can only really convey and have the students retain, say, 3 to 5 big concepts. Mm-hmm. Anything beyond that is just going to be absolute overkill. So my basic structure is to set up who I am, why I'm here, what I think you're looking for, and as a result, here's what I'm going to teach you. And it's important to give them that roadmap, just as I did today. My slide outline was who I am, what's our agenda, like what can you expect from this? Mm-hmm. What is the problem that you're facing? I covered this as well. And then I say, okay, here are the things that you can do in order to address it. It was the exact structure I used. So in terms of, piecing out exactly what the content is, that last part, how do I fix it, is your content. Mm-hmm. That's a little bit more difficult to give you like the perfect template for. Mm-hmm. And I think you'll have to make that decision, and you'll understand as you go. Yeah. Now, the next question, does that answer your question before I move on?
Yeah, because I was kind of I find myself going off in a tangent. Like if I'm talking mm-hmm. about something passionate and I just go, I'm like, okay, what was the point? what was I talking about? So, yeah.
Well, you are human, right? So sometimes it is okay to say, damn it, I lost my train of thought. What was I talking about again? Right. And someone will tell you and they'll laugh, right?
Yeah.
It's okay to be human. We're all expected to make some mistakes. As you do it more and more, though, I think what you'll find is it becomes easier to go on a tangent and then come right back to where you were.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
On the second question about preparation.
Can I drop in one more sub question? Why do you think we underestimate the value of what we know? You touched on this earlier when you were
Yeah.
talking about confidence and that kind of thing. Why do you think we do that? We like just underestimate that our knowledge has value that we can confidently represent.
Yeah. Should we also tackle how the world will be in 4 years?
Yeah, seriously.
It's an equally easy question. Yeah. So, I think there's many reasons for it, but I think what I would kind of come back to are the ways that we are persuaded as people, right? So as we look at whether it's me or you, Philip, about positioning, whatever it is that we're talking about, we're sort of on the shoulders of giants, right? Someone has come before us and said something related to this topic, if not the exact topic we're talking about. And so because they're known, we were able to find them in a Google search. They wrote a book. Other people reference their work. I think it's natural for all of us to kind of minimize what we know and our contribution, because, maybe we haven't done those things. Probably we haven't. Actually, when we're starting out, none of us have. But that doesn't mean that you don't know anything that's worth teaching or that's going to help people. So I would even challenge a lot of people to think beyond strictly the content that they're presenting, and also understand that there's a ton of value in your style, the way you think about things, the way you present them. Maybe you're using a metaphor or an analogy that's never been communicated before, even though all of the material is essentially the same, right? So I think that there's a lot of value we have both in the content, both in our experience, but also beyond that, right? Who we are as individuals. If you're watching this and you're a consultant, a freelancer, a service provider, there's something unique about you. And so part of it, I think, is finding your voice as well. And so I think because we remain relatively untested and we have maybe a deficit of evidence about how well we're going to perform, I think it's natural for a lot of us to doubt whether or not we're qualified, whether we're going to do a good job. But I think that we all have something to add. So I don't know if that answers your question perfectly, Philip, but it's a complicated one.
It is. That was a great answer. So back to that preparation time question now.
Preparation time. So in the beginning, when you're creating something from scratch, especially if you haven't done a lot of speaking engagements, it's going to take you a long time. Let me just be really clear about that. What does a long time mean? So I'm going to relate this back to some content marketing that I see people write about. I've seen people say that a long form post for them, say 4,000 words, takes 40 to 80 hours. Okay. So if you're Sumo Me and you're posting this long post, you had one person spend 1 to 2 weeks of their life putting that together. All right. That's kind of what it takes. In the beginning, your seminal thing. So when I put together a 2-hour course, and I'm working on another long course right now, I would say on average, that's taking about 6 to 8 hours per hour of material. Okay. So if you're doing your presentation for the first time, it's going to take you longer than that. I would multiply it by 3. Now, once you have it though, it's already done. You just iterate on it on the future. You come up with new angles. You repurpose it in different ways. You pull out sections of it. All of that material is done and reusable for you now. So for instance, I'll give you an example of what it took for me to do the slide deck today. I think I spent about 45 minutes writing an outline. I sent it to Philip. I said, hey, this is what I'm going to present. What do you think? He said, it looks great. And then I did the slides, which I don't have that many slides. I have 17 slides. The deck took me maybe 30 minutes. So as you spend more and more time doing this stuff, it gets a lot faster, right? So back to that question about structure, I already have a basic structure in mind for anything I present. And so that made it a lot easier to write the outline. And here's a pro tip also. Whenever you're putting together curriculum, content, you're sitting down to write, it's not a creative exercise. take some time to outline exactly what you want to say and worry about how you're going to say it. In this case, what do the slides look like after that? It makes everything so much faster.
Awesome. Okay. Aisha, great question. I'm going to send you back to the peanut gallery if that's okay. And we got a question from Liam. Liam, I'll go ahead and make you a panelist. So the question is, Liam says, I struggle to differentiate between demonstration and education when it comes to teaching people about what I do. I want to assert authority, but mix that up with going into too many details. You rely on authority when it comes to convincing people that what you're talking about is good to them, or do you really have to kind of prove it to them and demonstrate it to them? Good to see you, Liam.
Okay, so do you rely on authority when it comes to convincing people you know how to execute on the benefits you describe? And then the next question, or do you have to go into detail when on a sales call? Okay, so Liam, am I correct that this is mostly about sales?
I'd say so, yeah. If it's a means of generating leads, because I find that I often have to go into detail to explain to people why they need what I'm convinced they need. Okay.
Ooh, there's a lot there to dig out. Okay, so I would say the first thing is let's take in real life teaching as a lead generator and say you generate leads. The one thing I like to do is always include a real world example that I had experience with. And so like today I said, hey, I've done the General Assembly course. I've done this in real life workshop with Growth Marketing Conference, right? So that gives me a lot of credibility without having to say, I've done X, I've done Y. I'm like, here's an example of what I've done, okay? And what I learned out of it. So I think that that's a good way to do it. So if I'm teaching, say, conversion copy, I'll put up an example that we've done internally, and we already have case studies on these things, right? So as I'm making a point about speaking your customer's language, I'm showing an example of how here's how we applied it to liveplan.com. And here's the results, right? 78% increase in a test of a highly optimized page. That is gold, right? I would recommend, you don't have to do it every time. And the dirty little secret about performance marketing is quantifying empirically what you've done is not so cut and dry as everyone makes it out to be. But you should be able to get once a quarter, once every 6 months, a good case study. And so that's what I would do. And for you, maybe it's not numbers. Maybe it's, ending internal arguments. Maybe, who knows what it is, right? But there's some reason, some trigger, some job you're being hired to do, right? In my case, it's often getting more revenue, getting more clicks, getting more conversions. And so that's what I would present around. Do I go into details when on a sales call? So if I'm on a sales call, I think what you need to understand before you pick up the phone is, where is this person in their understanding of what it is that I do? Are they aware that they have a problem? Almost by definition, they will be if you're getting on the phone with them. What I think you're asking is, do they understand the solution I provide, or should I be talking about why I'm unique and why they should buy from me? Those are like worlds apart, right? If you're trying to sell the solution to them, it's an uphill battle. And here's why I would suggest never doing that. Because if you sell the solution to them, they're only going to arrive at the place of having to make a decision about who the best provider is for it. So you've done the work for all of your competitors to convince them to buy from someone, and now you may not even be in the right position to be able to sell to them while you're on the phone, right? So what I would recommend is, if someone isn't sure about the solution that they need, that's where you have, all the other things that Philip talks about that I would talk about, emails, content, like here are some resources that'll help you assess whether or not this is the right thing for you. And then follow up with them later and see if they want to have a more productive sales call.
I think that buyer's journey idea is pretty relevant to what you're talking about here, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Exactly. And without saying that, that's what I was trying to convey, is that people will go through a process in how they make a decision to buy anything. And so where they are in that process dictates a lot about how you can sell to them effectively. So just to answer your question a little bit more directly, in the call, what I'm really trying to do is develop affinity and rapport, ask them really smart questions about their business, not about like, you know, what are the exact deliverables you're looking for? That's not really what I care about. I'm trying to figure out what is their business problem. And then once I have that information, I'll say, okay, here's how I can solve it. Here's a little background about us. Here are a few examples of clients we've worked with like you. If you want more information about that, I can send it to you, and then I'll put them on the spot at the end of the call. Here's a pro tip for sales. At the end of the call, I always say, now that you know me a little bit and based on what we've talked about, is there any reason you wouldn't hire me? Which feels crazy the first time you do it. But people will tell you. They'll tell you, actually, yeah, I mean, I'm still not sure that you're the best person for X. But usually by the time you ask that question, they'll say, no, actually, I can't think of any reason. And then I'll say, great, then the next step is for me to send you a proposal. Let's get it. So there you go.
Yeah,
Nice.
thank you.
Yep.
Very helpful, guys.
Great question, Liam. All right, back to the peanut gallery you go. Brandon, I don't think is live with us right now. He's got a question. Are there IRL channels you know of beyond the usual suspects like conferences? A lot of the clients I've worked with are rather conference averse, so I'm looking for options to reach people other ways. Let me add on a question that came in the chat from Brian. So Brian said, let's say I've done work for environmental psychologists. Okay, well, he has a precursor to that. So if your customers are other techies, of course, you're going to go to tech conferences, which is kind of where you're going to feel most comfortable, right? But how do you locate non-tech conferences where your tech clients might be at? Which is very similar, I think, to Ryan's question. What's your advice there?
Yeah, so little shameless plug here. If you guys do want the slides, you can go to my site and get them, and I do answer some of these questions. What I would say is ask your clients. I mean, you should have a personal relationship with your clients, right? So ask them, what conferences do you go to? What are things other than conferences where you get out of the office and you mix with people either in your industry or outside of your industry? Oh, you go to this conference or this meetup outside of your industry. Why? What do you get out of that? They'll tell you, right? They'll tell you, and all you have to do is just take some notes, put it together, and now you have your list of options, and then you can sort through it and figure out what's best for you. So what I'm looking for is the possibility to bump into people who I could work with, partner with, or refer, right? Those are kind of, when I'm thinking about a networking event, those are the things I'm thinking about. When I'm thinking about a teaching event, I'm thinking a similar thing, right? But I do want to make sure that some percentage of the audience who's there will be in a position either to directly become a lead for me or be in a position to refer my service. The referrals are tough because you have way less control over that, right? We would always prefer, especially if someone says, I have a referral for you, then that's when you would want to take over and say, great, I'm going to, pound your inbox until you actually give it to me. So that's what I would say is just ask people. The other thing I would recommend is looking at LinkedIn or Facebook groups that are filled with people from your industry who look like your perfect persona, and go in there and see. People will post, oh, I'm going to this conference or that conference or this meetup or that meetup. And also you can pose the question to the group, which is hugely valuable to everybody else in the group. Which conferences are you going to? Which conferences do you hate? Which meetups are really important to you in your local area? So that's what I would say is just ask.
Okay, so there's a couple sub questions there. I've talked to people who they love the idea, but their main concern is I'm going to be so uncomfortable going to a conference of, let's say you're focused on cosmetic dentists, right? And you're a software developer. You're like, oh my God, I'm going to feel like such a fish out of water at this conference for cosmetic dentists. I tell them yes at first, and then they will like put you on a chair and carry you around because they're so excited to have your expertise right there for them. But what do you say to that? Like, feel, you know, that sense of being uncomfortable out, you know, out of your depth because you're among your clients and not your peers.
Yeah, I mean, I would say you're actually the unicorn, like you said, right? So when I've been to places where it's, say, you know, a chamber of commerce event or just like a network after work kind of thing, because you have a rare specialized skill set, as long as you can relate it to them and they can understand what it is that you do, everybody's going to want to talk to you for free advice, right? So if you're on stage at one of these places, first of all, being on stage says that the people organizing the conference have sought out information and feedback and have decided that your talk is worth giving. Huge validation that anybody there, or at least a high percentage of people there, will at least somewhat care about what you have to say and what you do, okay? So feel comfortable about that. If the question is beyond that, just networking events for, say, cosmetic dentists, I think it's really important to understand that cosmetic dentists don't give each other as much value as a few outside service providers who understand cosmetic dentistry, right, and their business. So they're all going to want a piece of you and to pick your brain and to stay in touch with you because you offer something that's different, right? By definition, you're one of the only people, if not the only person at that place who they can have these conversations with.
I guess I would add to that. A lot of people who, I always say this, and I'm curious if you found this to be true. Like you go to that conference for cosmetic dentists, the people at that conference are kind of, lonely is not the right word, but they're isolated in by their expertise, because how many people can they talk about cosmetic dentistry to, right? Like
Right.
Not that many. Their romantic partner, their friends have gotten tired of hearing about that stuff long ago, especially the things that are persistent business problems, which are hopefully the things you're interested in trying to apply your expertise to solve. So if you show up and just ask questions like, what is it like running a cosmetic dentistry? That also positions you as, oh, it changes things, so you don't have to feel uncomfortable about what you don't know, because what you don't know is actually becomes an asset in that situation.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And, you know, just to piggyback on that, I think one thing that we should all remember is beyond just looking for targeted expertise, one big reason a lot of people hire consultants is because they want someone with an outside perspective who isn't so close to the business. That is seen as a tremendous asset. So yeah, that's just kind of the nature, one of the natures of why people would hire a consultant in the first place. Last
sub question on this. What are, say, your top 3 sort of other venues other than conferences that you think teaching that are receptive to you coming in as a teacher? You mentioned meetups. Are there others?
Yeah, so meetups, local business networking events always have speakers who rotate. And so I would get in touch with them. I think if you're in a very highly technical field, though, you will have to bring it up a level or two to make it bigger picture. And then also, like local co-working spaces will often have teaching events and are always looking for programming in order to attract potential members. That's another good place. And then, you know, I don't know if we're considering webinars in real life, but this is another one, right? Me being here means that I'm talking to you and you're a different audience than I usually talk to. So that's another, if you don't want to, this could be maybe an easy way to bridge standing in front of a room full of people staring at you, knowing that, you know, 30 people will be watching you.
Cool. Okay. All right, we got 30 minutes left. I'm going to pick up the pace here on questions. I'm going to stop inviting people in unless you there's a raise your hand button. So if you raise your hand, I'll invite you into the video stream. But otherwise, I want to make sure we get through all these questions because there's some really good ones. Brandon says, you seem fairly confident, Liston, in your speaking engagements. Are there any tips you would recommend to build up confidence? I get you. I totally hear you, Brandon. It's like overwhelming. There's that lizard brain kicking in. It's just some people will just go into a full-blown panic attack when they see all those eyes on them What's your advice for that?
So first of all, public speaking doesn't come natural to me. The first time I spoke publicly, my hands were shaking. I had the cold sweats. I thought about running out of the room and killing myself, maybe. All of these things that we all think about. As Philip said in one of the emails leading up to this, I do have experience as a performing musician as well. That helped a lot. And what I would say is the more often you're on stage, the easier it becomes. Okay, so that's something we all know, right? It's like saying shoot 1,000,000 free throws and you're going to shoot a higher percentage. We get that. What I would look for is smaller, low pressure ways to get that experience. So instead of going for large conferences, I would say go for local events where there will be maybe 10 to 20 people there. Go for webinars. So that's one way of practicing, is being up in front of a group of people. The second way of practicing is knowing your material. So this is another advantage of limiting what you talk about to 1, 2, or 3 things. As you know your material, it's one less thing for you to think about. Now all you're thinking about is being an engaging presenter, right? Giving people value, making sure you're answering their questions, making sure you're integrating them into the discussion in the workshop. And so those are the 2 things I would say, but there's absolutely just no replacement for doing it, because it gets easier over time. Just like, think about in your life, all of the things you sucked at when you started, right? Or that were uncomfortable or made you nervous. As you've done them a lot, you become very good at them. This is no different.
Yeah, I could take up the rest of the time talking about, public embarrassment that I've inflicted on myself. It's funny at first, and then you're just like, oh, like everybody goes through this. So
right.
I can't agree more. But starting small, I think, is a real key. Sudden, I see more and more. I see this, especially as I myself get older. Like sudden, kind of disruptive changes when you're trying to develop a new capability within yourself. That's like a soft skill, not the way to do it. Boot camps are great for some things, but yeah.
Well, there's also, I've never done it, but there's also like Toastmasters or Dale Carnegie's How to Meet Friends and Influence People kind of groups where they focus on speaking persuasively and developing speaking skills. So that should be a very low pressure way also, because the whole reason to go there is because you want to learn it. So I've never done that personally, so I can't recommend it, but it's something that you can look into.
Yeah, Dave Schmidt asked that question. Do either of us have experience with Toastmasters? You said no. I say no, other than I worked at a place, and when I would get there, some certain day of the week, I would see a Toastmasters group going in the atrium at Montgomery Park in Portland, Oregon. I've never heard anybody say anything negative about Toastmasters.
Me either.
So that, I guess I take that as it probably works if you work it, kind of a thing. So yeah, it's. I will just say that from a lead generation perspective, the ability to get in front of a group of people, and that could even be 2 or 3 people who are like, a selection committee at your client, and have a presentation in your mind, not necessarily a slide deck, and walk them through something, kind of tell them a story about how things could be better for them, has got to be one of the top 3 business skills there is. In terms, at least when it comes to, I'm not talking about like running a Fortune 500 company, but for us, the people who do what we do, it's just huge.
Yep. Okay,
Tristan, how do you limit liability or scope while teaching a workshop? So when you, it says when you don't get drawn, but you don't look bad either. Not quite sure what that last sentence means, but let's just tackle the first one. How do you keep it? Let me add some color to it. How do you keep it from going off the rails? Or how do you keep it from somebody asking a bunch of tough questions that you don't know how to answer, like that kind of thing?
Okay, so this is a good question, because there's 2 ways things can go terribly awry. Actually, maybe 3 ways. One is you come with the wrong content. So I'll talk about that. One is you go off the rails and start ranting about perhaps the size of the crowd at the event. That would be bad. And then third is you have someone in the audience who constantly is derailing it. So let's tackle that one first. So, Tristan, I'd say it doesn't happen very often, but maybe 10% of the time, I get someone who thinks that they know as much or more than me about the topic and feels compelled to share it with everybody, right? So this is the person whose hand goes up every 2 minutes or will interject and add things while I'm talking, right? So one thing I would recommend you do is be polite to them. The crowd will turn on them eventually and just kind of silently wish that they would shut up. And so once you start to sense that happening, then I'll say to them, you know what, that's a really good question. I think that it's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, but I'd be happy to talk about that with you more offline. So come talk to me afterwards. And they'll get the message. If they don't completely shut up, they will talk a lot less after that because you're doing it in front of everybody and there's social proof that, yeah, in fact, we were thinking that too. I'll go back now. So first of all, like I said earlier, how do you avoid going on tangents? You can go on tangents, it's okay. But you need to develop the skill to come back to where you were and relate, hopefully, that tangent to what you were talking about. It's okay if you get lost every once in a while. You just, work on the skill of coming back. And that's something you should develop in your life as a whole. To the first point, coming with the wrong content. Sorry, my dog's scratching at my door. Coming with the wrong content is, hold on, I'm going to let him in real quick here.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm going to try to finish his sentence for you. And the one time that I did some IRL teaching as lead gen, it was fatal. I mean, not like fatal to me, just it was fatal to the effort to get good leads. But I'm curious, Liston, how did it work out in your case?
Well, so the first time I put together a long form in-person course that I taught, I would say that I got a really good response, yet I sensed that people were tuning out. Here's the difficulty with teaching is sometimes you will bring up a topic and give just the right information about it. Other times you won't go into it far enough, in which case you probably should have left it out because it's just going to create a bunch of questions for people that are left unanswered. And now those questions are bouncing around their minds the entire time. And other times you'll spend way too much time on a topic. Part of this is guessing. Part of it is if you have a friend who does what you do or is just willing to humor you, go through it with you and ask them to interject anytime they don't understand something, they have some natural questions, you're going on too long, okay, I get it, right? But part of it also is going to be trial and error. This is yet another vote for limiting the topics you do. Because if you're spread really thin and you're doing new things all the time, you're not going to have the experience to say, this is the right amount and these are the specific areas I want to cover under the umbrella of this topic. So that's what I would say is you may or may not get it exactly right. In fact, you probably won't get it exactly right the first, second, or third time. And so it's all about revising it. And that's one of the reasons I bring surveys.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Just giving yourself permission to do a little on-the-job learning. That is very difficult for us who are kind of wired more like perfectionists. But
right.
Sometimes there's no other way. Like you can practice something in your laboratory and maybe you'll get it 80% right, but you still have to do that final portion of learning on the job.
And I mean, I'm in marketing, right? No one is expecting to pay $20, $500, $600, even $1,000 to see me and expect me to be Seth Godin, right? You're not going to get that for that price. I'm sorry, right? If I were that good, I'd be charging a lot more. And so, give yourself some permission to make mistakes and understand that people know that you're not going to be the foremost, most polished speaker And that's okay, right? So you'll be able
Yeah.
to refine it over time.
And another concern I know people have about teaching live IRL is getting a question they can't answer. And
Yeah.
I don't know is perfectly acceptable. That is a
Yes.
good answer to a question. A, because you can't freaking know everything, and B, that can always be a follow-up opportunity. I don't know, but let me get back to you. Let me just make sure to swing by. I'll get your email address, and I'll follow up directly with you, or I'll post it on social media or whatever.
That's exactly what I do too. Yep.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Thanks, Tristan, for the question. James, you got quite a few questions here. You're live with us. Good to see you, by the way. Why don't you just take us through what you'd like to prioritize? They may not be in the order you want to go through them, but the floor is yours, James.
Great, thank you. This has been a really fantastic presentation, and love some of your insights and sales. Some really awesome value there.
Oh, cool.
I unfortunately can't see all my questions, so I'll try and focus on the ones that maybe pertain to me the most. I'm a solo service provider, and so I know one of the concerns I have about speaking engagements like this is, kind of being off the floor for a certain amount of time. How do you mitigate that? Like, how do you plan for the amount of time, like you mentioned earlier, that you attended the conference or wanted to? Like, how do you plan for how much time? How do you calculate that against your ROI? Is there a good middle ground? What do you kind of shoot for?
Yeah. So in one word, I would say guess. Making an educated guess is better than nothing. It's a really good question though, because so one of the ways that I determine that this would be worth my time is, like I said, I've landed a $30,000 client through speaking at events by the same person in the past. So that gave me, like, I knew what the audience was like. I knew they were motivated. I knew that what I have to say there can really help them. And so that was part of it. I figured, around $500 to $1,000 to be there. It's up to you whether or not you want to calculate, okay, well, if, like you said, if I'm not available to do billable time or client deliverables, what is that going to cost me? The way I look at it is, okay, on average, I know as a business owner, I need to spend at least half of my time on sales and marketing in order to keep the pipeline full, in order to increase my perceived brand value, all these things that are really important to me. And sometimes that means 4 hours a day, and other times that means 3 days in a row, and then I'm busting my ass for the next 2 weeks. Right? We can't, it's so hard to just say, like, I'm going to have a routine, and trust me, I'm a creature of routine, man. Me and my wife just moved into a new house, and we've been eating meals out of the microwave for 2 weeks. And it was like so horrible for me. I love to cook. So I'm a creature of habit, but sometimes you're going to have to break your work routine and focus that time into just a few days, even if that means for the next 2 or 3 weeks, you're kind of making up the time. So I am looking at the cost of my travel, the potential win, although you're never going to be able to say for sure at the time that you commit to it, what am I going to get out of this? Now, once I got the roster of people who were going to be at the workshop, which was after I made the commitment, I had a pretty good idea this is definitely going to be worth my time. I couldn't say, okay, this is going to be a 3x ROI. But the way I look at it is it's also giving me all these other opportunities. And so if I can look beyond just the sales leads that I can generate and say, okay, even if I didn't generate a sale, I'll be able to speak at more events, strengthen this relationship with the organizer, and connect to really prominent people in the industry. All right, it's worth my time. That's kind of how I look at it. Versus, actually, let me give you a counterpoint. Versus if you were to buy a booth at a conference, you would ask, how many people are going to be there? What percentage breakdown are they in different demographic categories? And then apply some factor. Okay, I think I can get 4% of them to become leads or sign up for something, right? That would be a much more strictly ROI kind of exercise. But to me, as a speaker, it's really hard to understand. Sometimes you're going to get 5 leads. Sometimes you're going to get none. It's hard to say. Is that as unsatisfying an answer as I can give you, James?
No, that was a fantastic answer. So
okay.
Thank you for that.
Uh-huh. And you also asked, what else do we have? How do you span the gap from less focused local meetups and bar camps to industry-focused conferences? Where's a good place to start if you haven't had much experience speaking in your current business focus area? So
that's a little overlapping with something we've already touched on.
It is.
But does it spur any new thoughts for you?
I mean, like I guess I look at a lot of this as I'll try it once or twice, and if I don't like it, I won't go again, right? So if you're going to meetups, chamber of commerce, drinks after work kind of events, that's a nice low pressure situation to go and see who's there and ask them too. Do you go to any other events? And there's nothing that says you would have to commit to going to it forever because you go once, right? Maybe you lose an hour or two of your time, but oh well. It's worth it to figure it out. Go ahead, Philip.
I think it gets to the larger question of, I'm always constantly thinking about people who are just starting. So in that first year of your business, you start as a self-employed person or a freelancer. Where do you think speaking, this type of teaching for lead generation fits in? Is it the very first thing you would think about doing, or would you do other stuff first and then kind of fold this in as you can afford the soft and hard cost of doing it?
All right. So part of it is, what are your natural strengths? Or what are you comfortable with, or at least what do people perceive to be your natural strengths? So for me, I like to speak. I like to be in front of people. I like to teach. I wish I had started this in the very beginning as one of my main channels rather than blogging, because I've seen tremendous benefits far beyond sales leads through speaking. When I started out, it was just a matter of telling a bunch of people that I knew who I thought were connected to the industry in some way, hey, I'm looking for speaking engagements. Do you know of any place that needs speakers like me? And then one or two people will say, oh yeah, actually I know this person, this woman who does this event. Would you like to meet her? Yeah, absolutely. And start a conversation, right? This is, it's the same as, how do I land my first client? It's like, go turn over 1 million rocks and you'll find something under one of them. And so this is part of that process, is like, first start with your once removed circle, people you directly know or someone that they know. And then you can span out into more focused, like looking for conferences, looking for the Philip Morgans of the world, looking for whoever who has an audience or group of people you can add value to.
I think that's great. James, I'm skipping ahead here. You got another question about evaluating the ROI. Maybe it's a little bit overlapping. What do you think? Do you want to dive in deeper on that, or what?
Which one are we on here?
Oh, I'm jumped down a little bit. How do you evaluate the ROI on expense? Here's one. If I may, James, I would like to select your question about the call to action, because I think that'd be great to have some more detail there. And I'm definitely conscious of not using up too much of your time here, Liston. So the question, how do you handle a call to action at the end of a talk or the end of a workshop? Is it different, like, that paid workshop versus being on the stage at a conference? How do you do that? Link to slides?
Vanity so let's do it right now.
Let's do it.
Let's do it right now. This is how I would do it, James. So after questions, let's say no one else had questions. I would say, thank you so much for listening to what I had to say. If you want the slides, go to listonwitherill.com/teaching-IRL. You can get the slides there. And then of course, I'll give you some other information over email. So that's what I do. That's what I would do. And I also offer to people, here's a way I can help you. I take limited consulting clients. Here's what I can do. I take limited coaching clients, whatever it is. And I always put up my email address too, because I think it's important to let people know, hey, you don't necessarily need to want to pay me a bunch of money. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. Over time, I think as you get more demand for you and what you do, you're going to be more protective of your time. But in the beginning, give away your time. Be as helpful to as many people as you possibly can, because that's going to, you really don't know where the dividends are going to come from.
Can you take us to that URL, to that teaching-IRL? I want
Yeah,
to see
sure.
what that. I want people to see what that looks like. No, I mean, like actually click on the URL and go there.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, show us what it looks like on the other end.
So it's super simple. This is my personal website, and all you do is pop your email address in. And so what that's going to do, of course, and Philip's taught you about a minimum viable funnel, but I'll know now who got onto my list as a result of seeing this. And on your end, you'll get information related to teaching in real life and some, a lot of the information I've covered here. But you'll also get some other information from me after that about how to say the right thing, which is what I'm really always interested in learning about people. How do they make decisions and what do they respond to?
So I think a great follow-up question from James there is, so would you try to get the list of people who attended, let's say, a workshop and somehow market to them? Or would you just let them opt in the way that you're talking about here, where they sort of respond to your call to action and sort of raise their hand as you get the question, I think.
I do. So here's what I do. And I've experimented with getting people to text in because it's a little bit lower friction. But I find people think that that's weird. I have a way for you to get 95% of every audience to opt in when you teach live. And this is the way. On your survey, hand out a paper survey, ask them to grade you, ask them for referrals, or if they want consulting help from you. But also at the top, I say, do you want the slides, yes or no? Before I pass it out, I say, hey, if you want the slides today, the only way to get them is to fill out the survey, put your email address, and circle, yes, I want the slides. Okay, now they're on my list. I have an assistant go manually type everything in, load it into Drip, which is my email system, send out the slides, and then people can opt out if they want, but that is the most effective way to capture almost everybody who came there. Now, even if they opt out, you can segment out and know who was there at your teaching event, right? Who's seen which course from me.
Cool.
How's that, James?
That's fantastic. Could I ask just one really quick nitpicky follow-up?
Yes, please.
I've done some other speaking, and it hasn't been exactly in this particular niche, but I've noticed at the end of the talk, if you seem to do a good job, people kind of rush the stage, and I've found, it's like people super engaged by what you're doing. There's also friends or colleagues who just want to like give you a high five or something like that, and then sometimes I've noticed like maybe one particular person will just want to talk to you about things for a very long time. Like, what are some strategies of how to handle that situation when you're approached by like 5 people? How do you handle that?
Yeah, so I try to answer one question for everybody. And then if they seem like really engaged, I'll say, hey, and they'll see there's 4 other people here. I'd really like to get to everybody's questions. What's the best way for us to continue this conversation? And they'll tell you, right? Oh, here's my card. Call me, email me. Can we talk after you've answered everyone else's questions, right? Whatever it is, put them in a position. Here's another persuasive tactic, right? Is get them to be consistent. Have them confirm they want to continue the conversation with you and how to do it. And then they will. So that's what I would do is I try to limit, 1 to 2 minutes per person, one question, something like that. Occasionally someone will monopolize your time, just like, you tell your clients, or I tell my clients, you have unlimited access to me during the life of our engagement. That's part of what you're paying for. And about 1 out of every 20 will abuse that. But most of the time people don't abuse it because they're busy.
Love that question. Thanks, James. Anything else you want to dig into?
Nope.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Well, you probably know where to find Liston online if you do. All right, I'm going to send you back to the peanut gallery, James. Couple quick things to wrap up here, Liston, and then I want you to repeat your call to action. Jake says, in terms of writing copy for our website and in reference to getting to know your audience, how do you go about getting prospects in your target market to discuss their most pressing problems? I feel like I know what I just did. I like that is like the heart of your business in a way, right?
Right.
Is that. So where can you point, Jake, to find out more about that? Because I feel like the 3 minutes we have left are not going to do that justice.
No, no, definitely not. That's what my entire business is about. Yeah, so I would point you to, you can sign up on my website for a course that I haven't launched yet, but there's a 5 email course and I promise I'll have it done by this weekend. So that's one way you can learn about that. I would say in a nutshell, it's all about asking very good questions and shutting up and just listening, right? And then gathering that data and putting it all together and understanding, because no matter what it is that you're going to do, whether it's speaking in real life, marketing, selling, looking for partnerships, it's all about really understanding people's problems and what you can do to solve them. So it's a very gigantic question. But the short of it is the biggest mistake people make is just not asking, or doing the homework to figure it out. So, on goodfunnel.co, there's lots of resources about how to look for testimonials and pull information out of there. We have information about how to interview your clients. So yeah, you can sign up for my list or go to GoodFunnel.
What's this course going to be called? Or is it obvious?
It's called Say the Right Thing, right?
Okay.
How to find out what to say to your clients in order to get them to become leads and buy from you.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that question, Jake. And then Kay just had an awesome suggestion about co-sponsoring events. That's where you kind of move out of borrowing somebody else's audience, or not totally, but it's a great thought about how to get an audience where you co-sponsor an event. You're sort of still teaching, but not just going to somebody else's conference.
Right.
Liston, thank you. Thank you. This was just so productive and such great information, I think. I'll just note very quickly for folks, as always, I record these. I put these on my website under the resources section, DevShop Marketing Briefings. Just to close, Liston, where again can folks go to learn more or dig deeper into this stuff or get in contact with you or whatever next step they'd like to take?
The best thing for them to do is to just go to listonwitherill.com specifically to get these slides, which I'm being told is coming up with the 404 error, but I'll fix that here in the next 5 minutes. They can go to listonwitherill.com/teaching-IRL. listonwitherill.com/teaching-IRL.
Great. Well, listen, thanks again. The sort of what happens next is I just hang up on everybody. So I'll talk to you at 5 tonight.
Great.
Thanks, everybody. See you around.